Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Hanu and Kaiser's YouTube Poecast. I am your host, Hanu TheHande Mäkinen, and penetrating your ears whether you like it or not, it's my co-host, Retro Kaiser.
Yep, the Dark Diamond himself, or the Dark Rider as I'm known by these days according to the Emerald Ranger's law.
Oh, yeah.
Which is very appropriate for today's episode, isn't it?
Maybe it is, yes, it is. And he mentions the Emerald Rangers. Yes, I should mention that as well, that that's the website Kaiser is working on these days, and I'll put a link to that in the description as well. But yes, welcome to to our YouTube Poecast. So what is this thingamabob? Well, it's a podcast. It's on YouTube. I'm not going to be putting up a download link for this one this time around. But as you might have inferred from the context clues, this is all about Edgar Allan Poe. And
Sorry, fans. This isn't about the Poes from the Legend of Zelda games.
yes, although they're probably named after them. Okay, so what is the Poecast? What are we going to be doing here? Well, what we're going to be doing, or what I'm going to be doing eventually, is going to be reading an Edgar Allan Poe story, and Kaiser is going to be reacting, and we both are pretty big fans of Edgar Allan Poe. Isn't that true?
I'm a big fan despite not being able to find any of his works to read. Although
Yes, we were discussing this. Yes.
I'm incredibly obsessed with trying to read some of his stuff, and I thought this was a good opportunity to actually finally hear one of his stories for once.
Yes, exactly. And okay, so my history with Poe, I don't remember exactly when I got into Poe. It might have been before this, but definitely during high school. Okay, when I was younger, I was not a big reader. Like, it's not that I hated reading, but like getting through like big novels was, every fucking book report was like agony for me because I just hated reading long novels and everything. So obviously, I kind of got more into short stories, and then in high school we had a whole course on just short stories, and that's when I really, really, really got into Edgar Allan Poe. Like, I loved reading short stories anyway, but then, like, the Poe stuff, even though it was, like, translated and everything, I really fell in love with it. And then I've really maintained a good relationship with Poe over the years. Then, when I got into university, I bought the book, which is in my hands right now, The Selected Tales, Edgar Allan Poe. This is by Penguin Publishing. And some people might remember that years ago on my YouTube channel, this channel that you're listening to this on, I had a video where I actually read out loud the entire story of The Black Cat, which is my favorite Edgar Allan Poe story. And it's funny because when I got this Selected Tales, I had not read The Black Cat. It was actually the first story I read off of this collection, and it was so good, and immediately became my personal favorite. But that video is, unfortunately, it's gone. I took it down like a couple of years ago. And I've been thinking, and I've been wanting to do something with Edgar Allan Poe on my YouTube channel for a while. But here's the thing. I really didn't want to do this as a shitty couch vlog, that series as well. And, I thought, like, how the hell am I going to make, like, a YouTube video about a book and, without, like, maybe doing an animation or a reenactment. I'd done the reading once, and it was just kind of like a passion project because I love the story so much, so I did that video. But I thought, like, I'm not going to read, like, every fucking Poe story on a YouTube video, especially because I felt like that's going to be a bit boring. But then I got the idea, hey, I'll get Kaiser on board, and he can react to the story as I'm reading it.
Sure, when you need to add a bit of spice to the videos, you always go to the Kaiser.
Well, yeah, you're the top choice. All right, and I thought we want to start today off with maybe a slightly shorter story, so that this first podcast doesn't run like just criminally long. But also, I wanted to start with a story that I think most people are at least slightly familiar with. And the story, which we are going to be reading today, is The Telltale Heart. First of all, Kaiser, do you know anything about The Telltale Heart?
I've heard of it, and I've seen it mentioned on Simpsons as like a diorama.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, just a quick backstory. I won't spoil anything about what the story is about, but I'll mention The Telltale Heart. I do have to say, and one of the things, the reason I love Edgar Allan Poe so much, like, okay, the guy's writings, they're all in the public domain. The guy wrote all his stories, and he lived and died before the American Civil War. So, these are old stories, but he does deserve huge credit for making some really easily readable stories. But the great thing about the Poe stories is that he's just a master of scenes. Like, there's always, all the best Poe stories have like one scene that always just sticks with you. Which is to say that some of the less great ones, like William Wilson, which is one of the stories that I don't really like, is the setting's kind of vague and you don't really get like what it's about. Like, Poe did write more kind of wistful stuff as well that is a little bit more woolly, as my old university teacher would have said. But then all the really good, powerful stuff, like Pet and the Pendulum, for instance. You've heard of that one?
Mm-hmm. That's the one that's one of the main ones I'm looking forward to reading.
Yes.
That and The Raven.
Yeah, and the Benares, which is one of the creepiest finales of all time, and trust me, you will never look at pearly white teeth the same way again after reading that. But yeah, so the Telltale Heart, and the thing about the Telltale Heart is it's a really good story, but I also think it's maybe just a smidge overrated. I hate to say that, but because a lot of people always bring it up in collusion with The Black Cat, and The Black Cat is just a way better story. It's a longer story, it has a bigger build-up. With the Telltale Heart, the main thing is like, and this is not a spoiler because you get this impression right from the first paragraph, is that the narrator is insane. Like, he keeps insisting just how sane he is, you can tell. But it's a very powerful story, has a very powerful finale, and so before we start reading, are there any comments you want to give off here, or any opinions on Poe? How did you get into Poe, by the way?
Well, remember when I mentioned The Simpsons earlier before?
Yep.
The first, you know how they do their typical Treehouse of Horrors every year?
Yeah.
That's how I got into Poe, because one of the segments from the very first Treehouse of Horror was The Raven, but with Bart and Homer.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Yeah, The Raven's a pretty... I gotta be honest, I've never been a big fan of Poe's poetry, but The Raven is like the one that I do like a lot. I've always been more about his like stories. Yeah.
Yep, like I've been interested in him ever since then, and of course, countless of television shows. Well, not countless. Like Sabrina the Teenage Witch. How they had like someone. Oh, what was it? It was one of the aunts. I don't remember if this was the live action or the animated one. It could have actually been in both, but
Yep.
I think it was not live action, the anime one. Like one of the witches were talking about like their previous boyfriends, and one of them was Edgar Allan Poe, and it was just so darn gloomy, and he was excited it was Day in the Witch or something.
Yeah. Okay.
And
yep.
And the third thing that got me really interested in is the rapper not MC Frontalot. That's a completely different rapper, although I recommend. I'm talking about MC Lars. He did some songs based on Edgar Allan Poe. He's got a rap called The Raven and Flow Like Poe.
Flow Like Poe. Hey, and one that we have to do, I think maybe I should let you read, is the Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is the first story in the C. August Dupin trilogy of stories.
I don't know what's scarier, horror novels or me reading them.
Well, the Murders in the Rue Morgue, that's a murder mystery, actually. So because it's the first in the Dupin trilogy. Dupin was the detective character that Poe had, and
not to be confused with El Kabong.
Yeah, no, but that's something that we should. If people like this, and hey, leave comments in the leave in the comments if you like this. What stories do you want us to read in future podcasts? And indeed, if you want us to do like the Murders in the Rue Morgue next time. You probably know the Iron Maiden song. It actually doesn't have anything to do with the story, which I think is something that's very common with people. Probably know about the different movie adaptations of Poe, and the thing that always comes up is that, well, they're not really based on the short stories. They just borrow the titles.
And if you don't want to hear any more of this, just simply put in the chat, nevermore.
Except one, I haven't seen it, but I've heard. I think it was Vincent Price. Maybe it wasn't, but I think that Vincent Price starred in adaptation of The Fall of House of Usher, and I've heard that.
Oh, that sounds orgasmic. Vincent Price and Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay. But I've heard that one actually gets pretty close to what the story was. But hey, are you ready to start now?
Yes.
All
I
right, so
am.
here we go. We start with the telltale heart, which I actually misspelled in the chat before. There's actually a hyphen in the telltale.
And just a warning, if you hear any crappy sound effects, that means I'm sorry. I couldn't hold myself in.
All right.
You
Oh,
can't have horror without sound effects.
all right, let's begin. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then? Am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. Okay, I kind of messed that up, calmly.
I know. Just to interrupt you here.
Yes.
Now I want to hear you do this with a Ren voice, because I can totally picture Ren from Ren and Stimpy completely reading Edgar Allan Poe tales.
Ren, that's the skinny one.
That's the Chihuahua.
Yeah.
Idiot Stimpy.
I can't do the voice, but hey, let's continue. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture.
Wink, wink.
A pale blue eye with a film over it.
That's creepy.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Are you happy we're doing this now?
Oh yeah, I'm getting a really vivid imagination.
Yes.
Of what's going on.
Yes.
And yes, if you want to know, it is in the form of a black and white movie.
Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever.
That's not very nice.
Yeah, it's not. Also, forever is spelled for space ever. That's how you see. This is always interesting to me when you see how they used to spell old words in older forms of English. Okay. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad? Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about midnight I turned the latch of his door and opened it. Oh, so... oh, so gently. Gotta put a little oil on that.
Wait.
All right. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern. All closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. Oh boy. All right. Can you do the sound effect again? I need to take a sip of water. Yeah, that's the one. Mm.
I have to do the old Free Amigos reference when you mention thrusting.
Yeah. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. I think it's ha, but I'm not sure. Now we've completely changed the tone of the story. Okay.
What's this? 50 Shades of Poe?
Sort of. He took an entire hour to get his head through the door. That's creepy. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye, and this I did for 7 long nights. I think he means that he did it 7 nights in a row, not that it took him 7 nights to... That would have been extra creepy.
That would have been... That's one weak-ass laser beam.
Yeah. Every night just at midnight, but I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye.
Evil eye!
I'm so glad somebody else did that and not me. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber, and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in the hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man, indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept.
He's very devious and creepy.
Yes. Also crazy, but yeah, let's keep going. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine.
That was the sound of a clock ticking, by the way.
Yes. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I think that's your... it's not sagacity. Yes. Okay.
Sagacity.
Yeah, I don't know that. That's a weird word for me as well. I could scarcely...
Sagacity.
Yeah. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. And perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled.
What was that? What was that? Who's there?
Now you may think that I drew back, but no! His room was as black as pitch, with the thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened, through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. All right. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in the bed, crying out,
Boing!
"Who's there?" I kept quite still, and said nothing. For a moment, for a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. And in the and in the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. I read that wrong. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was the low stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. Or diarrhea. I knew the sound. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it was welled up from my own bosom. Deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. The lack of toilet paper. Sorry. Oh boy, we have really gone out the deep end. Okay, it's about to get gruesome, so let's keep focused. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him. Oh boy. Although I chuckled at heart. Oh God. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise. When he had turned in the bed, his fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor." Or, It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp. Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim, and it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room.
Oh no!
When I had waited a long time very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and full upon the vulture eye. Was that a sneeze?
That's
Okay.
supposed to be like a stealthy shot.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's what it was. That's what that was. Okay. It was open, wide open, and I grew furiously as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with the hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. Exactly, it's quite quiet.
That's what I was going for.
I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. Huh, okay, I guess tattoo kind of used to mean like the beat. Okay. It grew quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once. Yes, once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with the muffled sound. This, however, did not. Yeah, this, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. Yeah, it kind of it doesn't really go into detail how he killed him. I guess he.
That's some ultra deep detail on killing an old man, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. Okay, if still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precaution I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. Yeah, that's not crazy. Yes. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings.
Drop.
Yeah.
Pull. Drop.
I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. The tub had caught all. Ha ha! Yeah. I don't know, maybe just ha 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 ha. Something like that would be
Ha
good.
ha 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 ha.
Yeah, but it's only two ha's. Yeah, that's the thing.
Ha 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 ha.
Ha ha! Yeah, hey, that's
Ha.
that's more appropriate. Okay. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door.
Doing, doing.
I went down to open it with a light heart. For what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men,
Hello, hello, hello.
who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police.
Hi ho, hello, hi ho.
Very suave, yes. Okay. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. What was that?
That was a goose.
Okay. Foul
That
play.
kind of foul play?
Okay. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentlemen welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room, and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim.
Clever.
The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct.
Ring ring.
It continued and became more distinct.
Ring ring.
I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with heightened voice, yet the sound increased. And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. Do you remember what that sound was? Yeah. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observation of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed. I raved, I swore, I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark! Louder, 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 louder! Villains, I shrieked, dissemble me no more. I I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. Yeah, and that's it.
Well, he definitely cracked under pressure, didn't he?
Yeah. So it was the heartbeat that he was still hearing at that point.
Mm-hmm. Bottom, bottom, bottom.
So, what did you think of the
what
Telltale Heart?
Oh, he definitely likes to overthink things, doesn't he?
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, it's a really fun story to read because he's so cartoonishly insane.
Like,
But yeah,
the way
that's
I picked,
Yep. Sorry.
like the way I pictured this, I nearly said nearly. I'm trying to say testicular character, but I don't think that's the right word. It's taking me so. But the way I picture this character is I picture him as like a very tall man with like striped pants, a curly mustache, and a curly hairdo, and a sinister grin, like a vaudeville villain.
Yeah, exactly. He is like super insane, and that's the thing. Like, it's a very straightforward story. Like I said, it was a very short story. And the thing is, like, we go straight into the thing that's, driving him crazy, which is the vulture eye on the old guy that whose servant he is. And then there's the actual murder and taking the body apart. And then it goes straight for the finale. Now, the thing about this and the Black Cat is that the Black Cat is about a character who also kills somebody, but he does it by accident. But he also conceals the body, and there's the big revelation of the body being discovered at the end. But the difference there is that there's a bit more ambiguity, and that character isn't crazy. But there's an ambiguity about like the fact that earlier in the story he kills his own cat, and so we don't know if the horrible things that are happening to him, if it's just coincidence, or if the cat is kind of like getting its revenge from beyond the grave, sort of. And there's another interesting thing about that. I won't spoil it too much in case we decide to read that at some point. But but the Telltale Heart, it goes like straight for that thing. But like that whole final scene, like the idea that they're kind of all just sitting around this room, and then this guy's steadily just kind of losing his mind because he keeps hearing the heart beating underneath the floorboards. Like that's the kind of strong. Well, there's kind of two like very imposing pictures. There's that scene with the heartbeat, and then there's the whole idea of him like sticking his head slowly through the door and looking at this vulture eye thing. Like, it is a very powerful story, but it's almost a little cartoony, like you said, and kind of vaudeville-y almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
hearing about this guy, he sounds like he does not get enough sleep at all. That's probably why things are a bit crazy.
Oh yeah, yeah, that was good. Yeah, that was great. And like that's the thing I like. And I was thinking that like at the end here, we've gone over a little over a half hour now. So I was thinking that we could still do. There's a very short story in here called The Oval Portrait. It would not take me a long time to read, but I think we'll save that for a future Poecast. But how are you feeling now about maybe investing in this particular collection?
I'm going to have to now. That story was very entertaining. It sends some. I see what you mean by easy to read. Especially, they're quite easy to imagine as well.
Yeah,
like I can picture a blockbuster movie in my head.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I've read a lot of like really old stories, and this is from the early 1800s. Like, the thing that I always have a hard time getting into is the language. The language is always very flowery. So, I kind of start to fall like half asleep. I start to fall asleep during like a very long paragraph if there's not a whole lot going on. Poe does not suffer from that problem, except there's a couple of stories, and I would even say like The Murders in the Rue Morgue is a little guilty of that. The first 3 paragraphs are kind of very exposition-y before like we get to the actual murder, but I think it does help a little bit like setting up the story, because Murders in the Rue Morgue, in case you can't figure it out, it actually takes place in Paris, for instance. But like something like Hop Frog, it gets right to the point. Benares also has kind of a slow start, and there's one that people talk about. Poe wrote a lot of stories about like tragic female characters, and Benares is one of those. It's the best one in my opinion. But there's one in this collection called Ligeia, and it's really not so much a story. It's more like almost like a prose poem. But it's like a guy seeing the ghost of his dead girlfriend, basically. So, yeah. So those are the kind of Poe stories that I'm not super excited about. But most of the time, it's like if a Poe story goes a little awry, it's either at the very beginning, like the first couple of paragraphs are a little boring, or the finale is a little weak. Like the Gold Bug is another good example, which I think we should read because that's actually a really interesting story. It's not a horror story, but it's actually more of like an adventure story, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. Okay, but I think if you have nothing else to add, do you?
Not really.
Okay.
Other than I apologize for the annoying sound effects, guys.
No, they were brilliant. I think you really improved that reading. But yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up for this first YouTube Poecast. And as we said already, please leave in the comments which Poe story do you want to hear us read next. And we'll see you on the next one. So, bye-bye.
See you later, my fellow Poe and Poettes.
Yes. Nevermore.